I mean, here's the analogy I see with the banking industry, because much like a lot of what happened on Wall Street, when the wind's at your back and things are going well, you're a genius. But when conditions change, it's the conditions. You externalize it. It's not your fault. So basically, it sounds to me like a lot of people who were standing to lose money and they were trying to cut their losses as much as possible, and somebody wouldn't let them. Is that fair? Is that too simplistic? Yes,
It's
Diane.
fair and it's too simplistic.
And it's too simplistic. so like this is an ongoing story. What does it say right now, and what should we be watching as this unfolds?
What I think is the poignancy of that moment, January 3rd, being the day that Cameron Winklevoss, after seemingly months of what he characterizes as good faith efforts to sit down with Barry Silbert and find out some sort of a way where his customers could get their entitled rewards for this investment while not bankrupting anybody else. Cameron left published a public letter to Barry Silbert, basically airing all the dirty laundry. In a lot of ways, confirming some suspicions that people had had previously. In other ways, opening new doors for
suspicions such as what?
The role that the way that these companies were intertwined, the way that these companies were intertwined, and the possible ripple effects of that. And what we didn't get into, and we shouldn't get into, there's much more detailed descriptions online, and you can read them on Forbes Digital Assets, the Forbes website. But basically, the money that was borrowed from Genesis was used to buy securities from Grayscale. And when it started to become apparent that those securities weren't going to mature at a profitable margin for the borrowers, they used those soon-to-be underwater securities as collateral to borrow more money. And those loans, in some cases, seemingly were turned into other loans.
So is it a misrepresentation to some extent, knowing what's coming?
I think that what was going to be the domino that fell, and again, we don't know for sure what the actual genesis was. It was February, March, April of 2022. Probably multiple things happened that triggered some pretty high-profile failures, that triggered other pretty high-profile failures, that triggered other pretty high-profile failures, that eventually brought FTX into it, and that now have seemingly embroiled Barry Silbert, Digital Currency Group, Genesis, Grayscale, and Gemini as one high-profile example, but many other companies that did similar practices. This all amounts to something that looks an awful lot like what happened in the lead-up to the Great Recession. So, you
and that they were all guilty of doing similar behavior.
Yeah, lending money.
Groupthink.
Yeah, and lending money that they had borrowed from people that had borrowed it, and creating a sort of Russian doll domino effect, whatever you want to call it.
But there's nobody there to rescue. I mean, and then you've got this poignant note you mentioned, which is basically in some ways saying, we're not going to jump. There's going to be no big meeting in Washington and a rescue plan.
So here's the interesting part, because now if we're going to go back to that message in the Bitcoin Genesis blog, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout. So who is the chancellor in this instance, right? Barry had said previously that he wanted to be the Warren Buffett of crypto. You could almost argue that if he had succeeded, that he might have been the person to do the bailing out.
The Hank Paulson of crypto.
Yeah.
Right.
But forbid. He's in fact embroiled in the problem, right? So there are credible reports that there are multiple conversations going on with some Bitcoin bulls and maybe some people loyal to the CEOs of these companies that maybe are a little skeptical but might come off the sideline to help a friend out. There remains an opportunity for a bailout here. What amounts to a bailout? But not a bailout from the government, a bailout from the private sector, a bailout from other companies, a bailout from maybe the friends of these CEOs.
The companies that still have the assets to bail out. And of course, we're going to be, we'll be talking about this, I'm sure, week to week. It's not like this is, everything you need to know